channel. We're so pleased to have you here watching another virtual author event with us. My name is Annie, and I am the events coordinator at Majors and Quinn Booksellers, which is an independent bookstore in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Tonight, we are so pleased to be hosting the only U.S. bookstore stop for the book High as the Waters Rise, which is by Anja Kampmann. Anja, wave. There's so many of us on screen, maybe. And translated from the German by Posten. And they are going to be in conversation with author Ilana Masad. And we are so happy to have all three of these people here with us to talk about this beautiful book. I want to remind you that it is available at Majors and Quinn. So if you head to majorsandquinn.com, I will drop a link directly to the book in the chat later, but you can also just head to our website and search for the title or the author yourself. It is a beautiful book put out by Catapult, and we're very grateful to them for helping us set up this special event experience. And I am going to be here in the background watching this conversation, and just want you to know that you can ask questions by commenting on the Facebook or YouTube video that you are watching. So type your questions in there. Let us know where you're watching from. Let the authors know what kind of questions you have, and we will be doing a Q&A portion at the end of the event. But first, you are going to hear from High as the Waters Rise, a little bit of the German original and the English translation, and then Ilana will come back and ask some questions of these two wonderful writers. So I just want to say thank you again for tuning in, and take it away, Anne and Anja.
I think I'm going to just do the brief introductions first. So welcome, Anja and Anne, to this wonderful event. I'm so excited to be here with you. I read the book, I think, for the first time in May, I guess. So it's been a while since I first discovered how gorgeous it was, and I just fell in love so deeply with the prose and with these characters. So I just want to introduce you two to the audience a little bit more. Anja Kampmann is a German poet who was born in Hamburg and resides in Leipzig. High as the Waters Rise is her first novel, for which she received the Mara Cassens Prize for Best German Debut Novel and the Lessing Promotion Prize. She was also awarded the Bergen-Enkheim Prize from the city of Frankfurt and was nominated for the Leipzig Book Fair Prize and the German Book Prize. Her translator, Posten, translates prose, poetry, and drama from the German. She is the recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship, and her translations of authors such as Peter Bixel, Karl Selig, Thomas Brasch, Tancred Dost, Anna Katharina Hahn, and Paul Schiebalt have appeared with New Directions, Christine Bergen in the University of Chicago Press, Music and Literature, N+1, Vice, the Buenos Aires Review, Field, Stonecutter, and Hanging Loose, among other publications. She is based in Berlin. So we have two people who it's very late for them, and we're very grateful to have them here. So a little bit about the book before you both get started on reading. This book focuses on Václav, who works on an oil drilling platform, and has done so for many years in many different places around the world. And this book starts when his closest friend for some years, Matthias, goes missing and is presumed dead. And sort of the rest of the book from there is Václav dealing with his grief, leaving the rig and sort of wandering around different places that have significance in his and Matthias's journey together and time together over the years. And it's very moving, and it takes you to very unexpected places. There are some homing doves involved at one point, homing pigeons, I guess I should say. And so we're going to hear Anja read from the original German for a little bit, and then Anne will be reading a slightly longer portion in English, and then we'll come back and we'll talk. And remember to post questions in the chat if you would like to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will read a short piece from the German book, which looks like this. And it's in the first chapter, right after Matthias has gone missing. It's the morning after the storm, and Václav, for the first time, meets the rig manager, Anderson, who's new to the rig and not a person he would trust at all. Er hatte nicht die Kraft, ihn zu fragen. Durch das Fenster von Andersons Büro sah Václav die Männer ihre Arbeit fortsetzen, sah den Drehtisch, die farbigen Arbeitsanzüge und Helme in grellem Weiß. Das Wasser hatte sich beruhigt, lag da, flach, und es war niemand gekommen und hatte einen Kranz ins Wasser geworfen, eine Rede, irgendwas. In seinem Schädel gab es keinen Platz für einen Abschied ohne dunkle Wirtshäuser mit brauner Soße. Er dachte an die Stahlkochereien des Ruhrgebiets, Männer, von denen man ihm als Kind erzählt hatte, die mitten am Tag verschwanden, eine weißglühende Hitze nach Jahren zwischen Karneval und Doppelkorn. Auf die elenden Kriegsjahre folgte das Schweigen der Eichenkonsolen, die Enge der Zechensiedlung, Biografien, die zu weniger als Asche wurden im kochenden Stahl der Hochöfen. Als Kind blieb ihm das Bild von Umkleidekabinen, von Straßenschuhen, die am Abend nicht mehr angezogen wurden. Er sah den Kirchenchor von St. Cyriakus, Witwen in schweren Kostümen, die sich in Reihe stellten, ein Gemeindehaus voller Tortenböden, Früchte aus unendlichen Kleingärten, die schwarzen Schuhe glatt wie ausgewischte Teller. Kinder, die polnische und deutsche Lieder sangen, denen man die Kragen gesteift hatte. Die Wellen hatten sich gelegt, nicht einmal die Farben stimmten. T-Shirts, bunte Helme, haarige Waden, ringsum lag hell die See.
Thank you. And I'm going to read from basically the same section, starting a few lines earlier and then continue on. And I think this is a really nice section to get a feel for what the book is like, not only because it introduces us to Václav's immediate grief and the dissonance that he experiences when talking to the ring manager and seeing the official reaction to something that's so heartrending for him. But it also shows a little bit of something that will be very important throughout the book, which is the memories that begin to arise of his time with Matthias on the rigs, triggered by this grief, and his beginning to sort of question what's been happening these past 12 years. Everything that followed seemed too clear and yet somehow blurry. Frayed images, their edges ungraspable. After an hour-long conversation, Anderson, the generous rig manager, had given him the last 4 days of his shift off. While he spoke, Václav thought of the birds that imitate rain to lure worms out of the soil. He didn't have the strength to ask him. Through the window of Anderson's office, Václav saw the men continuing to work, saw the rotary table, the colored work clothes and glaring white helmets. The water had grown still, lay there, flat, and no one came and threw a wreath in the water, a speech, anything. There was no place in his brain for a farewell without dark restaurants and brown sauce. He thought of the steel mills of the Ruhr, what he'd been told as a child about men who disappeared in the middle of the day, a white-hot heat after years spent between carnival and grain alcohol. After the misery of the war came the silence of oak sideboards, the cramped miner's estate, lives turned to less than ash in the boiling steel of the blast furnaces. As a child, he carried with him the image of locker rooms, street shoes never worn again. He saw the choir at St. Cyriacus, widows lined up in their heavy suits, a parish hall filled with pies, fruit from infinite allotment gardens, black shoes smooth as washed plates, children singing songs in Polish and German, collars starched. The waves had died down. Not even the colors were right. T-shirts, colorful helmets, hairy calves, the sea bright all around them. Anderson asked several times if he wanted to go home. Several times, Václav told him that the address he had listed as his emergency contact no longer existed. Anderson said it would be good if he went back to land soon and didn't hesitate in reporting the loss to headquarters. He held the phone to his ear. He said Matyas's name in the middle of sentences that sounded like a list of things that were no longer needed. Perhaps he didn't understand what he was saying. Perhaps he was trying to stay businesslike and matter-of-fact. From the wall gleamed a photo of some unknown crew taken with flash, the reflectors on the arms and legs of their red coveralls shining more clearly than any face. Václav tried to guess how old Anderson was. Surely 15 years younger than he, mid-30s maybe. Anderson's checked shirt slid back a bit and revealed a light, fatty hand. Everything about him was pale and hairless, and his voice had all the energy of a stick stirring up a lukewarm puddle. He didn't know the tears Alexei had shed, missing the birth and short life of his son. He knew nothing of the languages in which each dreamed his private dreams. He spoke evenly, nodded a few times, then hung up. He reached for a yellow leather case, pulled out a fountain pen, wrote a few words, and looked at Václav as if he'd done something important. He would do his best to make sure that Václav was transferred to another platform after the weeks on land, Anderson said. That would be a relief for you, surely. His smile. What about him? Václav said. Anderson looked at him in astonishment. What about him? He shook his head slowly and then pointed to the chart on the wall. Mr. Grosek, you do know what these shadings mean? For a moment, they both stared at the topographical map where the test drillings in the platform were marked. Yes, he said absently. Either the waves pushed him against one of the steel pontoons, he balled the fingers of his right hand briefly into a fist, or the undertow swept him away. Anderson looked out. His mouth was also soft, and he avoided Václav's eyes. Václav missed Pippo, their old rig manager. He wondered what Pippo would have done. Pippo had hairy hands, and they could smoke together when something was wrong. Pippo knew his people. When the others laughed loudly, only a faint smile would cross his face, but his voice could get hard as the spiny fin of a perch. You could hurt yourself on it. He would never have talked with this secretary like a little puppy dog. Anderson nodded toward the door. The men will let me know if they see anything unusual outside. He leaned back in his chair. We'll be in touch. Your shuttle will be around here. We'll be here around 3. And it was only this sudden rage that made him stand up. There was the curve of his seat back, his thumbs boring into it, and the fact that Anderson fell silent when he saw him standing like that. Yes, frightened, but more the way one is frightened by a bug or by an unexpected noise, as if he might suddenly jump at him. Václav just stood there and stared. Don't be stupid, Anderson said softly, biting his lip. I mean it. On the way to the cabin, Václav suddenly felt heavy, as if he hadn't slept in weeks. He tore open their closets and threw their things together, stuffed them into the bags, then carried them out, both bags, on deck into the sudden sea air. He climbed up to the helideck, and the drilling continued. They pumped more drilling fluid into the depths to keep up the pressure. The Puma wasn't there yet, and the bags were heavy. Only Petrov accompanied him to the landing deck. He stood bent like an oak and spoke little. Václav leaned against a wall, saw the others continuing to work. The crane swung around. The wind was still cold. His face felt hot. His eyes welled up. Behind him, he heard steps on the stairs, saw Francis, still filthy in his overalls. Wenzel, he said, taking a breath. What did they say? Where are you going? Francis took off his gloves and let them fall next to him like 2 dead fish. Václav could see the line of his boots under his pant legs. Everything seemed too big, the clothes, the helmet. Francis reminded him of an animal whose fur had gotten wet, making it look suddenly pitiful and sick. What are they going to do now? He asked. What will they do with... He faltered as if he didn't dare to continue. With Matyas, that's still his name, Václav said softly. It felt wrong to play this role. As he talked, he listened almost curiously to his own voice, which sounded unusually firm. They'll do nothing. He could see Francis pursing his lips. His skin shone greasily as if he hadn't washed in days. Do you remember that boat a couple years ago? Off Media? They were almost to land. 3 of them were never found, and divers... Václav waved him off. Are you coming back? Francis asked quickly. He was nervous. The shift was about to start up again, and he had to get back. Even after so much time, he still had the feeling that he couldn't afford to make a false step in front of the others. Of course. Václav clapped him on the shoulder. Sure. Then he watched him climb back down to the deck and cross the bridge to the drill floor. It gave him a pang to see him like that, already back with the others. The helicopter didn't come till evening. This isn't Mexico. The sentence crossed his mind several times, but he didn't know what to make of it. This wasn't Mexico, and the ocean was calm, but Matthias wasn't there. So that gives you a little taste, and I think we'll talk about it now.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anja.
Thank you both so much. That last bit gave me shivers again, all over again. I've been rereading it again recently, so it's just been fun to hear the way you both read the prose, which is just so glorious. So my first question is for both of you. Well, for Anja really, and later I will want to ask about the translation process as well. But Anja, where did this novel come from for you? Sort of what was the idea that sparked it?
Well, Václav came into a short story I wrote. He was one of the figures in a short story, which was basically a story which was set in Cairo, where there was this one rig worker sort of loose, and it was only like 6 pages or something, but it felt very intense to me, and I was still curious because I really felt that I wasn't close enough, or I didn't really get who he was. So the story sort of started there. I think before that, I don't know, it would be a long way to tell how this came about, but from there I really started to sort of get deeper into the character, or dive deeper into his past, see and try to understand the way the people he was living with beforehand, the reasons why he sort of went there, and from there also to see the friends he made there, to see how he made friends with people out there, and from there sort of develop the story. But it was really both ways, and for me the starting point was Václav as a character, really.
Yeah, thank you. And much of the book's plot, like you were just talking about, is sort of involves, I mean, Václav is moving forward. He's going places, right? He's moving from where he is on the rig back to land, then to another city, right? Sort of traveling around, which feels very much in the tradition, this kind of tradition of a wandering hero, right? But what is also interesting is that every place that he goes, it kind of triggers a whole host of memories. Mm-hmm. That fill in more of what we know about him and about how he got to where he is. And I was wondering sort of whether that the way that developed, that plot and that structure, was that something that you knew at first, early when you were starting to figure him out, or how did you kind of work through that structure of that plot?
It's a good question, because sometimes I wasn't really sure how to get all these layers into one story, because there are so many memories that I sort of wanted or felt were sort of necessary to understand the whole story, that I was curious myself where everything would sort of find its place within the story. But for the journey, he sort of he makes it came. The development came with with the writing process, but it was also something I could picture in my mind. For example, I wanted to relate this oil business and the rig industry with Václav's upbringing in the old Western German coal mining area, Ruhrgebiet. So that was a connection I wanted to make, but I didn't want to make it like too obvious, or it was more for me important to sort of have these sort of poles in the story, and then a lot of the story I tried to give it room while I was writing it, and also the characters he meets and the friends he has. It was sort of interesting for me as well, and I had a feeling that if I don't really know what is going to happen, it's most likely that it's going to be interesting for the reader as well. But,
Can I ask a question, actually? Are there, because it doesn't, to me, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you know so much about Václav in the sense that I feel like there's maybe things that don't even make it into the book that are behind him. Things are touched on, and you get and they never come back. And you get the sense that there's a whole story there that we never discover. And then there are other things that do come back again and again, and the sort of images of the Ruhrgebiet and that kind of thing. But are there things that you thought about in terms of Václav that actually never made it into the book, or things that you know about him that just weren't relevant?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things. I think at some stage I even knew what kind of music he was listening to and that kind of stuff. I was really, and I would have other persons of his past or dialogues with people, which then I thought were too specific or too, that was just too much. So I really had to kick out a lot of it. But for me, it was sort of important to know these things.
Yeah. And I'm interested in sort of the general translation process, and then I have one even sort of more specific question about it. But how did this work for you? I mean, who approached who? I'm just interested. And also then, how did you work together on this translation? And Anne, what was the process like for you?
Well, Anja and I have known each other and worked together for a while before this book, actually. And that's one of the reasons, I suppose, that I picked the book up in the first place, expecting it to be as to speak to me as much as Anja's poetry had spoken to me, and it did. And so I wanted to pitch it to publishers, thought it was so obviously wonderful that people would be banging down the door. But it actually took a while until it found the right place. And then in terms of the actual process, I had translated a little bit of the book, obviously, in order to pitch it. And there's sort of two important aspects of the process of translating a book like this. One is the thing that I had already done and the thing that I do all the time, which is I knew Anja's poetry. The book really spoke to me, and so it was an issue of writing that again, making it sound like that, finding the right rhythms, which was a process of experimentation. But actually, after the first 20 pages, I felt like I got it, which doesn't mean there weren't naughty things to work out, but it was pretty clear to me when it was right. But for this book, then there's this whole other weird side in terms of content, most of which I knew nothing about. I certainly knew nothing about oil platforms or pigeons. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about the book, not just for my experience, but for readers too, is that you suddenly discover how little you know about things that you feel suddenly you should know about. That's what the book brings attention to. Our world rests on Václav's work, but what is a rotary table? I'm not sure I can tell you now, but I can point to it on a diagram. So there was a lot of research on all of those aspects, and then a lot of conversation with Anja, checking those details, but also checking a lot of the more poetic references. Now I forget what it was, but there's something that just came up in here, and I thought, oh, I wonder if I even understood that right today. I mean, I know the words are right, but is it the person thinking the thing that I think that he's thinking? So I don't know. Anja, if you want to say anything more about how we work together.
Yeah, I was very happy when Anne said that she wanted to translate it, because I really didn't think it was, it was her choice. And yeah, I was super happy about that. But also I knew what kind of book this is, and that it was not going to be easy. And then for me, it was really interesting to see what kind of questions arise when you try to bring this novel into another language. And also the amount of research I did was, massive, I guess, in terms of Ulrich workers and I don't know, a lot of stuff. Also, gas fields nowadays, where are they? It's sometimes material which is just, one snippet in a dialogue, but it has to sort of be correct. So that was that was big. But then I think I can tell that there was another sort of little translation before, and it really felt awfully wrong, and I couldn't really say why. But when Anne sent me her sample of like 20 pages, I was like, oh my God, it's there. Like, really the rhythm. And it's hard to explain why something feels right, but I really felt that she got the vibe or the rhythm or the music maybe of the book. And so I wasn't at all worried. It was all, it felt like all these little details were just, were small in comparison to this whole, atmosphere that Anne was able to create in English.
Yeah, just a reminder to our audience, please feel free to put questions in the chat for when we get to our Q&A later. You can do it in the comments of the Facebook or of the Facebook Live, or in the comments of the YouTube if you're watching it through YouTube. If you start writing them, then we'll be able to look at them at the end. So you talked about the musicality and sort of the rhythm of the book. And that is one of the things that I as a reader, I love books that have this kind of atmosphere that is very hard to describe. But to me, it felt at least partially like the atmosphere was this kind of like moving from very far out to very close. And it was sort of like moving always between these sort of almost like the abstract thoughts of grieving that are kind of almost disconnected from the body to then this like intense like entering of Václav into his own body and being very aware of it. And the shift in time is also, I think, very, very interesting. And this was something I was wondering about in the translation process, because I mean, verbs in English are stupidly complicated sometimes. And I know that German also has its own complications in terms of verbs and tenses. And the book, when we have these memories that come in, we're often we enter those memories almost in the same way that we're entering the present tense events of the book, which makes it sometimes disorienting in this like very powerful, visceral way. And I was wondering, was that something that was difficult to work from the original German into the English, and how did you create that?
That's a great question. I think for me, I would answer almost more as a reader than as a translator, in that, I don't know if this was your experience, but I think the book teaches you how to read it, or it sort of guides you. At first, it can be very disorienting. Like, why is this happening in the middle of the sentence? I understand all these words, but it's a surprise. I'm not really sure why it's there, but what can you do but continue to read it? And it requires a lot of attention. It requires, because at first you might want to give up. You might say, I don't understand why that image is there, but I'm so compelled by this character. I'm so compelled by the story, I'll keep going. And if you do pay a lot of attention, you start to understand these things that you didn't understand before. And that attention, I think, pays off in an also really special way. Because you are forced to pay such close attention, you really feel like you are Václav. And how that played out in the translation, I don't know. I feel like usually it was, I would translate whatever was there. I would try to stick it into the sentence, surprising as it was. If it still didn't make sense to me why it was there, I would ask Anja. And sometimes I did think of, I had crazy stories in my head that were not what Anja intended, which is also kind of fun that you can read that sort of thing into this open prose. But often the answer was to leave it the way it was, and to have the reader have the same experience that I had, which is to think, okay, I'll keep going.
Was that sort of the intended effect, Anja, the kind of like disorienting and then drawing you in?
I surely didn't want to disorient people, but or the reader, but for me, it was also important to sort of have the freedom to jump into different time zones and jump into images, which I would then at some stage explain. And I think if you sort of start to trust in the story, you don't get like shaken off it by little jumps. I think for me it was sort of for me it was a way to connect different layers of the story. So there wasn't much of a choice, really. I mean, I could have made chapters and put everything in order and say like, oh well, this is 10 years ago here and this is 10 years ago there, but it would have been a completely different book. And I really wanted to sort of stay with the character in the first place.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple of the themes that I find sort of very amazing and gorgeous and important also in the book. So I mentioned a little bit about sort of the embodiedness, the way that we see Václav in his body. And that also relates to his friendship with Matthias. And as I was reading it, there are a lot of there's a sort of homoerotic undertone to their friendship, this very deep closeness that is physical at times, not going to the level of sexual that we see, but it feels very sensual still. And I was wondering if you could talk a little about that aspect of their friendship and how that affects the grieving process for Václav.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question, because it's this relationship between Václav and Matthias is very present throughout the book, and in the beginning, he's grieving as one would grieve for a lover, and there are always little scenes where he sort of remembers how maybe Matthias touched his shoulder, or how they were lying at a beach and it was windy and they were just the two of them. And it's what I wanted to stress was not the homoerotic aspect, but the meaning of this love and relationship, which is like almost the only thing which is left for Václav. There's hardly anything but this love and close relation to his bunkmate and friend. Also within this harsh society of rig workers. So there's a big tenderness between them, and it's something that sort of keeps Václav going. Before he meets Matthias for the first time, he's been on the rig for 5 or 6 years already, and he gets into an accident. And because of this accident, he has to do some security training, and that's where he meets Matthias. And at one point, it says that before that, he sort of tried to give up, and everything was, became a routine and didn't really make sense anymore. But then Matthias pops up, and everything gets a meaning again, and so it's the feeling that they can sort of make something out of this strange life together, and that's sort of the relation they have, and that's why it's then so disappointing and sad that it doesn't work out for them both.
Yeah, their friendship is so beautiful, and also I think looks at just a different kind of masculinity, right? One that allows for that even in this harsh society, or that they allowed for that. At least the two of them are open to that. And another thing that they seem to have in common, but not only them, also the other rig workers, and it comes up often in the book in different ways, is the socioeconomic class that they both come from or are both existing in, kind of that makes rig work very palatable, or not palatable, if that's the wrong word, makes it something that calls to them because you can make good money in relatively short amounts of time, but it's also extremely dangerous, right? And so, and you mention that often in kind of different ways throughout the book. You bring up how and why they are there, and how and why the other men are there. So what aspect of that felt very important to you to kind of explore in the book?
I think it wasn't just one aspect. I think the interesting thing about it is that there's a big promise in this sort of rig life when you look at it from a distance, because you earn money in short time, and you're allowed to travel. You will see a lot of the world, and you will be able to, or you will have access to societies and places which you normally haven't. Saying this, Matthias and Václav both come from more like closed and simple ways of life. Václav grew up as the son of a miner in Western Germany, and he decided to go to the rigs when sort of money was running out, and the only option would have been to become a bus driver at the village. And for Matthias, it was also sort of a breakout out of very limited way of living in rural Hungary. So, but for me, it was both. I wanted to stress both the fascination and the dreams and the promise that goes with this sort of wide open world and the money, and at the same time the sort of cost or price you have to pay if you get into it. I think that's really what's also still fascinating for me when I look at it, that it's very much this dreamlike place of the wide open sea, and it's quite the opposite at the same time.
Yeah, right, because it's also very enclosed, obviously. It's like you can't leave the rig. You have tiny little cell rooms, right?
Yeah,
These long shifts.
yeah, like 12-hour shifts, and it's very intense for some of them. It's very physical work. They are exhausted when they come back, and and then this sort of back or coming back is also after a while might vanish.
Right. Yeah. Especially is also how do you come back from something that no one really understands, right? Like that's such a specific way of living. Which, yeah, you mentioned earlier that sort of all of our lives rest in some way on Václav's work and the work of other men like him. So would you say a little more about that and what you mean by that, and the where the environmental sort of theme comes into the book as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, it might sound strange when I say we all depend on people like Václav, but what I mean is, of course, not this Václav, but all these. I think work in general has become sort of invisible, and especially with this oil rig workers. They don't leave traces. They when they are done, they just seal the hole in the ocean floor, and then it's you don't even see where they were. And the aspect of like ecology or what they do out there is something I was thinking about a lot. But I think for Václav himself or for the men out there, it's really not something to think about. I don't know how to put it at the moment. Anne, could you help out?
I'm not sure if this answers the same question, but I think something that's important to me about the way Václav is described and the way it ties into the political aspect is that it makes Václav's choices very comprehensible. I think the book shows in a very human way why someone would go out to an oil platform to work very long hours, dangerous work, for money that, as you said, Ilana, you somehow can't really enjoy at the end of the day. And how those choices that Václav makes are part of a structure, and they're not only part of the structure of his life, they're part of the structure of his father's life. They're part of the way our world comes together. And that I think it does answer the question in terms of how the world rests on that labor.
Yeah. I mean, and you say that Václav doesn't really think about this, but we get moments in the book where he's remembering oil spills that we all, the things that end up on the news, right? Everyone knows about this oil spill and that oil spill because the news talks about it for like a week and then they forget about it again. But he seems sometimes kind of haunted by these moments, like, he's suddenly forced to be aware of kind of how his work is related to this corporate greed and like all of the issues therein. So do you think that he's going through a kind of change in that way during the time of the book that we see him moving, or is this something that he just needs to sort of tamp down and not think about most of the time?
Yeah, I think this tamping down was what he was living with for 12 years. And then as he gets further away from the rigs and the actual work, there are moments that he remembers which are sort of related to this fear. I think what is often said is that the man, not only Václav, but the men out there, they know that they are sort of working on a bomb. Like it could just blow up, and if it would, there would be no way out. And there's I think this danger is something that he didn't have time to think about when he was there, but then during the book, there are more and more scenes in which it sort of pops up, and there's also this tension between him and Matthias sometimes, because one of them tries to say, well, it's not that bad, and the other one is suddenly more aware. So they also have to balance with this fear. And also the news are something which like when they are when they are when they are away from the rigs, they would see the oil spills on TV, and they would look at it like bewildered. And also they don't really talk about it, but it's very much a part of their life. And also what happens when a rig blows up is something they are very aware of. But it's just that I couldn't have them have a dialogue like, oh, this is really dangerous, what's gonna happen after a while. Like that wouldn't have been possible, but of course these were big issues for me.
Yeah, it would have changed the whole spirit of the book if they were to have that kind of political conversation in the middle, right? So we have, I think, quite a few questions from the audience. So if you're ready, I would love to share some of them.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have from Judy Metcalf. I'm curious about the process of translation and whether particularly Anja felt she had the power to reject or veto choices made by Anne in the translation. I'm also interested.
Well, that sounds as if Anne would have been a danger for the book. But she wasn't. And I think if I, of course, if I would like read a passage and think like, oh, Anne, what is it? I would have, I would have called her immediately, but no need to really.
No need to veto things, it sounds like.
Well, I had a moment of panic at the end where I think there was just sort of submission panic where I thought suddenly, oh no, like I've done everything wrong. I've betrayed the entire spirit of this book. And I think I did ask Anja to look it over and say, like, did I do something terribly wrong? Did I cut up all the sentences? And she was very supportive. I think in the end, the book is okay.
It's gorgeous. It's more than okay. Okay, Brittany Jordan asks, I would love to know how you each think about the grief of the main character. I do mean partially because he is a man, but also just how to get inside of the space of a very specific context of grief.
Well, this the question of him being a man and me being a woman writer was not very big in my mind during the process. Of course, I was talking to a lot of people and also talking to a lot of rig workers, but then I think grief is not something. I mean, I think when you grieve, you don't grieve as a woman or a man in the first place, but then the expectation of the society, they might be very different for a grieving woman or grieving man, but the feeling, I guess, is not something very different.
Yeah. And how do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can say how I got inside the space of the grief, but I do think there's something very special and unusual about the way, certainly men and women don't necessarily grieve differently, but the way in which Václav's grief is expressed in such a restrained way, and expressed not in terms of I'm weeping, I feel sad, but in terms of objects or in terms of memories. And I'm not sure how Anja did it, but I think it works really well. We know how sad he is almost more than he does because of the things that he thinks about and sees, but not because he says, I have this horrible feeling in my stomach because the person that I love is gone. You know, I think that's, yeah.
Thank you. So Dustin Kurtz says, I admire how the novel begins with the sharp shock of Matthias's disappearance and how the rest of the novel is the reckoning with Václav's various alienations. Was it always structured that way with that at the beginning and then going from that?
Yes, the beginning was the beginning. I mean, of course, there were changes to be made, but I knew that I wanted to start on the rig. And in this, I mean, there's also this short snippet in the very beginning, which shows Matthias and Václav before they go onto the rig. But yeah, it was important for me to really be in that specific atmosphere and also show them amongst the other workers. And also I think the rig world has got such a specific speed and rhythm, and that was a good starting point. And then from there it was great to go to the other places and go deeper into the characters.
Yeah. Brittany Jordan asks for a friend without an account, but who is curious. As far as they know, German and English work quite differently regarding the sentence length. Was that an issue? And what other linguistic aspects did you work on in the translation together?
That's a great question. Maybe not length so much as, or length per se, as much as the way a sentence is set up and the expectations of how you can set up a sentence. I think that was one of the things that I was panicking about when I asked Anja if I had betrayed the book, because one of the aspects in this book and in Anja's writing in general, and to some degree in German writing, is that you have a lot of freedom in terms of the expectations of readers to just put things one after another and create these long rhythmical sentences, which you heard Anja read from also, where a lot of things just keep coming. And it's really beautiful, but it's a sort of additive, it's an additive aesthetic. And there aren't always the sorts of conjunctions that we expect in English. There aren't always the sorts of explanations like, and then this, and because this, but rather there's just these sentences with a lot of things in it. And of course I wanted to make it somehow sound that way in English. And in many cases, I think I challenge English readers' expectations by trying to replicate that. But at other times, you just can't stretch the language more than it will allow, and it wouldn't have sounded beautiful if I did it exactly the same way. And so I just tried to get a feel for how it sounded to me as a reader. Sometimes I would make a sentence as long as it was in Anja's original, and then I would read it out loud, and I would think, I'm lost myself. I somehow have to change this, clarify it, or just break it up in some way.
Yeah, you know, I did notice, because I for some reason always think about punctuation, especially when it comes to like sort of long, beautiful sentences that take you places, right? And I noticed that I don't think you use any semicolons.
They're not many. There are not many. There might be one or two, but
right. So, but that using a comma instead of a semicolon, like, it's such a small choice, but it allows for that, like, the chugging along feeling that I was dancing to a second ago, and I thought that was so interesting, and I was wondering if that was like a translation choice to create that effect.
It was a translation choice to try to do that the way German does that. I mean, that's the way the German is. There you can just stick things together with commas. So, And I think that I hope I did that in the translation as well. What I said about teaching the reader how to read the book. Perhaps at the beginning, those sentences do feel long. They do feel like they take some getting used to or take a lot of attention. But I think once you start to get into the rhythm of the book, they start to make more sense and they start to feel more natural. And I think they do ultimately sound like English.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I can attest, at least as a reader also, that I remember just being so sort of stunned by the prose in the first few pages that I had to kind of read really slowly to make sure I was getting everything. And then slowly as I went, I was like, wait, this is actually a page turner. What? I just like stopped thinking about it. So it really did teach me how to read it very well. And that like by the time I was at like page 70 or something, I was like, now I can like really go, you know, because it's a moving book. Like people are moving all the time. So there is that physical movement happening that's helpful in that way too. Judy Metcalf asks, Anja, you are a poet and now a novelist. And which, if either, do you prefer, or what freedoms does poetry offer you as a writer as opposed to novels and vice versa?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. I think it's in a poem. It's great because you can sort of you have this small world and you don't have to explain stuff. You can sort of set things and you can really work with language and rhythm. Whereas in a poem, you cannot have anybody talk and you cannot really go that deep. And that's why what I really enjoyed writing that novel, to sort of really follow a character over a long period of time and make people talk and have like really sharp and hard sentences. And then you could also go into this, have a soft pattern, and then, change the sort of mood. And also what I really loved about this book was to sort of do this research and get out into a world which is not mine and get sort of far behind the text. Maybe that's also something I learned in poetry, that for me, writing is not like writing just about me, but to create something, and I'm in the background and the text is in the foreground and everything is there. And but for this novel, it was really interesting and fascinating to also talk to the people, do the research, and sort of take all this home into language and deal with that. And it was a great experience. And I didn't stop writing poems. My next poetry collection will come out in spring. I just handed it in. So
Congratulations. Always scary.
Yeah, but I love both. But I really love telling stories, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. Also to write these scenes Anne mentioned before, which probably won't find the way into the book, but are so important to sort of create the whole thing.
And we have, I think we'll probably have time for 2 more questions. So I'm going to ask this one. If anyone has one last question they want to put in, remember you can put that in the Facebook comments or for the Facebook Live or in the YouTube comment section. Judy asks also of you, Anne, how does one become a translator? I know that's probably a complicated question, but she also adds that I suspect your beautiful words on the translation expose the talents of a fine writer as well. So both of you are fine writers. So how does one become a translator?
I can only say how I became a translator. I think it's quite different. I mean, it's not much of a career path. Become a translator first by studying music? I don't know. I mean, that's true of me. I studied German in college, and I had no idea what to do with it, as one doesn't know what to do with a degree in German, until I translated a few poems, and suddenly sort of the light bulb went off, like, oh, this is exactly what I've been looking for. I love working with language. I love writing. but I don't really have any stories to tell, or at least I don't feel like I do right now. Perfect. Great. I'll become a translator. So what happens next? Translate a lot of things. Judy is astute in thinking that it has a lot to do with writing. I studied creative writing. I studied translation in a creative writing program and did really more writing than I did translation in that program, and more reading as well. So I feel more confident and happier as a translator than as a writer, but there are moments that the writing side needs to come out as well.
Thank you. Okay, and I think this is our last question from Kendall Story. Anja, tell us about what you're working on next, if you can.
It's a question which is a bit affected by our current situation, because I started writing a novel for which I got research fund to go to the Western Balkan and China. I got this funding the end of February. So, it's a bit I'm a bit on hold. Is that what you say? Yeah, I can't really go into the areas I would and talk to the people I would like to talk to, but it would be about the Silk Roads, the new Silk Roads. But I have a plan B, because I also started to work on a novel which deals with the past of Hamburg, which is also not at all just a beauty. I don't know. These two things are on the line, but I hope to be traveling next spring if the situation gets better. But I decided not to go because of the dangers that might go with it at the moment.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you both so much. This has been so wonderful.
Thank you for having us. It was great. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you, Annie, for having all of us.
Yes, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for your really great questions. This has been great, and I hope you all, if you have not already had a chance to read the book, it is truly beautiful, and I hope you all get to check it out, which you can do on our website, majorsandquinn.com, library. But yeah, it is a beautiful piece of work, and I feel so lucky to have gotten to see this conversation. So thanks so much, and have a wonderful